Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. On this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, politics, sport, and anything else we can think of. Now, today's guest is doing a brilliant new book called Emancipation for Goalposts, Football's Role in the Fall of Yugoslavia. His name's Chris Etchingham, and I'm here to talk with him about this book. Hello, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, extremely well. Before we do a deep dive into the book and the themes it talks about, can you just explain to our viewers like who you are? Is this your first book? And what led you to write this book?
So this is my first book. I'm not a full-time author at all. I work in the public sector. This is writing a book is an itch I've wanted to scratch for about 30 years since I was at school. And this particular subject I'm interested in because around about 1989, I was 12 years old. So that's when the Berlin Wall came down and we had the communist revolutions in Eastern Europe. Following that, we had Italian 90, where we had the really, really good Yugoslav team that got all the way to the quarterfinals. And we had players that you didn't sort of see very often because this was the pre-internet age. So Dragan Stojkovic, he appeared and had a magnificent tournament, especially the quarterfinal the second round against Spain. It was just one of these wonderful players you sort of see and they stick in your mind. Someone like Quaresma or someone like that who you don't see very often, but really sort of make an impression on you. And around this sort of time, Yugoslavia began falling apart as well. And it was a very violent way that it fell apart. And it was very interesting because it made an impression on me because at that time I was going on holiday with my parents quite a lot to Europe and to France and to places like that. And the scenes you saw on TV, the houses in Yugoslavia, the terrain, the landscape, looked very, very similar to the places I'd been on holiday. And then the only thing is you got tanks in front of them and people holding guns and stuff like that. So that made quite an impression on me. And I always sort of stuck with sort of watching Yugoslav players in particular after that, not so much the league because the internet wasn't what it was back then, but when Gazzetta Football Italia came on TV in the early 90s on Channel 4, you'd have Savicevic and Boban and Mihailovic and players from that Italian 90 team, other players from that Italian 90 team coming across and you'd be able to see them more and more every week. And they're all really, really good players. There's no sort of bog standard average Yugoslav player at that time. I can remember playing in Serie A. They were all sort of incredible, or at least the ones that made impressions on me were.
Yeah. So let's take it back to the beginning, before the Civil War. I know this is going to be a difficult question because trying to sum up events what led to it is it's hard, but what were the events that actually in short led up to this actual civil war taking place?
Okay, so post-World War II, you had Marshal Josip Tito in charge of Yugoslavia. He had a policy of brotherhood and unity as a way of keeping the six republics of Yugoslavia together. And basically, for want of a better word, it was working for the greater good, the collective good. Tito died in May 1980, and I imagine the same as when you've got any big leader like that, there's quite a power vacuum that appears afterwards. And out of that power vacuum came Slobodan Milosevic. And he made overtures at the start about trying to keep sort of Yugoslavia together. He went to Kosovo and gave a speech in Kosovo to the local Serb population there about how he wanted Yugoslavia to be united and remain together and this sort of thing. And some of the people there listening to his speech said how they were being attacked by ethnic Albanians, and the Serbs are the forgotten people. There's a big thing in the Serb psychology about sort of being the oppressed and the sort of glorious defeats and all that sort of thing. And Milosevic said, no one will oppress you again to these people. And from there, it began to sort of subtly steamroller. So you would have strikes, minor strikes in Kosovo. You would have, from there, you'd have inklings of self-determination and separationism from Slovenia in particular, then Croatia. So you would have Slovenia had its referendum in early 1990, I think it was. 88% ish of the population said that they wanted to become independent. They declared their independence, which led to the First War, which was the 10-day war, where Slovenia fought for its independence against Yugoslavia. And I think it came as a bit of a surprise to people. It's just, we didn't expect this sort of thing to happen. You sort of accidentally end up at war, as it were. But Slovenia had their 10-day war. They got their independence out of it. Croatia and Slovenia were probably the two most economic, high-powered republics within Yugoslavia. Croatia saw what happened to Slovenia and thought that they would quite like a bit of that as well. Seeing their future within Western Europe rather than sort of tied to Yugoslavia and Eastern Europe. The only problem with that is, unlike in Serbia, there is a much more sizable Serb population in Croatia, which led to a lot of friction between local Croatians who wanted to separate and local Serbs who really didn't want to separate. You had the Serb autonomous region of Krajina declare its independence from Croatia to stay with Yugoslavia, and you had the war there from 1991 to 1995, which Croatia eventually became independent of. And then from 1992, you had the war in Bosnia. Bosnia was a very sort of ethnically mixed republic, mixed of Bosnian Muslims, Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats. And it got quite murky. Officially, the Croats and the Bosnian Muslims are on the same side, but if you look at cities like Mostar, they did turn against each other. Croatia and Bosnia, there was a significant degree of intermingling and intermarriage between different ethnicities, which I think made it sort of murkier still, that you didn't get in Slovenia. And certainly in Macedonia, which you didn't get when Macedonia got its independence quite freely. There wasn't a sizable Yugoslav population there. So Serbia was quite happy and Yugoslavia was quite happy to see Macedonia go. You didn't get that in Bosnia. And from 1992 to 1995, Bosnia was engulfed in a horrendous ethnic civil war, which saw war crimes such as the siege of Sarajevo, which carried on for 4 years, where Serbs had a stranglehold around, and Yugoslavia had a stranglehold around the city. You had the massacre at Srebrenica, where 8,000 Muslim men and boys were massacred by the Yugoslavian Serb army and paramilitaries. 1995, that war ended with the Daytona Agreement between Croatia, Bosnia, and Yugoslavia. And then Bosnia got its independence. Serbia and Montenegro stayed together until 2006, I think, 2005, 2006, where Montenegro held a referendum. And the majority, 55%, voted to leave Yugoslavia. And following that, Yugoslavia was no more. There was the war in Kosovo as well, which was the civil war in Kosovo. So you had the majority Albanian population living with a minority Serb population. So Kosovo wasn't a republic. It was like the others, like Croatia and Bosnia, it was a semi-autonomous republic, but it had a special place in Serb hearts because the Battle of Kosovo was fought there. It was another glorious defeat for Serbia, which is what they sort of revel in. And so they see it as very much their heartland. And they didn't want to see it go despite what the Albanian Kosovars wanted. So you're sort of left now with that sort of the state of it where some people recognize Kosovo as an independent country, many don't. You have the EU and NATO, I think, in there administering Kosovo because it's still very much divided along ethnic lines. And we even had flare-ups again this year, ethnic flare-ups. So yeah, that's how Yugoslavia fell apart.
Okay, so before Tito died, going to football, excuse me, what was Yugoslavian football like before, up until in the time of Tito? I know they made the semi-finals of the European Championships.
Yeah.
Actually, no, they made a final because they beat England and Alan Murray, I think, got sent off in that tournament. But other than that, how was one, their clubs in Europe, and two, their national side before 1980 when Tito died?
So Tito divided. Tito removed any sort of sign of ethnicity from clubs that had played in the football league devised by the occupied Axis powers in the Second World War. Any of those that took part in that were removed, and from that you have teams like Red Star sort of emerge out of the ashes. And it was kind of a fluctuating fluctuating league of fortune. So you had your big four of Dinamo Zagreb, Hajduk Split, Red Star Belgrade, and Partizan Belgrade, and they sort of intermingled the sort of also kind of rotated the league around themselves. They did very well with themselves. There were some barren spells. I think it was either Hajduk or Dinamo didn't win anything barely in the 70s. Within Europe, Partizan got to, I think it was a final one particular year where they lost to Real Madrid. I think it was the Real Madrid team that were all conquering when they won the first sort of 5 or 6 European Cups. And they gave English teams a bit of a run for their money as well in the 60s and 70s. They played Leeds a couple of times. They played Manchester United. And I don't think they won on every occasion, but they certainly gave these teams a run for their money. I don't think they achieved great things, but at the same time, you didn't really want to face them if you're a major European power, these teams. And I think same for the national team as well. Again, you would be expected to beat them, but you wouldn't enjoy facing them because they had the skill, but they also had the tenacity, stroke over sort of bearing temperament, which sort of spilled over a couple of times. There was a game at Old Trafford where one of the former Yugoslav teams played and kicked George Best pretty much off the park. So it varied, but no one really liked playing against them because you were guaranteed not to have an easy game.
Weren't they called the Brazil of Europe at one point? Not because of their success, but because of their technical ability.
Yeah, definitely. They were, and they were very good technically, and you could see that within games where you had migrants from Yugoslavia move to Australia. You would have the established, for want of a better word, Anglo-Saxon Irish population who played football with physicality, and you would have the Balkan migrants turn up, and Italian migrants as well, and they would play football with sort of with a bit more finesse and skill. And you certainly saw that with teams back in Yugoslavia as well. They were very, very technically gifted players for their time.
So what changed in the 90s? Besides Tito's death in 1980, what changed in Yugoslavian football that started producing these real young, promising footballers that were starting to be noticed on the global stage?
I think what happened is you have a quote unquote golden generation. Most clubs or countries get them every now and then, and you sort of harness the fact that you've got the right group of players, the right number of players at the right time. In 1987, Yugoslavia went to Chile to play in the World Under-20 Championships, and they were really only there as a token gesture. They were sort of made to send a squad. They didn't really want to. They only sent one journalist along to cover it, and he only went to look at the expat population in Chile. The Yugoslav expat population wasn't really there to cover the football. But you had players there that, such as Stimac was there, Boban was there. I think Darko Panchev was a little bit too old. And you also had players such as Mihailovic who didn't make it. And Prosinecki went there as well. Robert Prosinecki went there. But yeah, the fact that Mihailovic didn't go, showed that they have got an awful lot of depth to this team. They sort of had a group at that particular point in time. And they went not really that bothered. The players thought, sorry, while we're here, we might as well give it a go. And they did. And they came up against an East German team that had Matthias Sammer in their team, and a very, very good West German team they faced in the final. But they won. They took it to a penalty shootout against the Germans. Zvonimir Boban scored the winning goal. And it sort of collectively came together. One thing they did have as well, they had a rule where you could play abroad. If you were Yugoslav player, you could play abroad, but not until you were 28, which meant that you kept an awful lot of your talent towards their prime, really. You could develop them and nurture them and sort of get them to play how you want, coach them how you want without any other coaches giving them sort of bad habits. And by the time they sort of got to the national team, they were sort of honed in the way you wanted them to play. So these players, they carried on learning in the leagues, in the Yugoslav league, well into their 20s. And so when it came to Italia 90, it would have been interesting to see what had happened at Euro 92 and the World Cup in 1994, had Yugoslavia allowed to play there, where this group of players, they knew each other. They were friends with each other, despite being different ethnicities. They were teammates first. And they knew what was expected of them to attain that level. But I think the 28 rule, it was 28-year-old rule, is a key thing as to why at that particular point in time the players were so good.
So we get to Italia 90, as I say, they do very well. They get to the quarterfinals, I believe, with the face Argentina. Were the favourites going into that game, or did people see that as an even game?
I'm not sure. That's a quite tough one, because Argentina were the holders, but they hadn't had a very good World Cup at all. They lost the first game to Cameroon, and they'd lost to 9 men Cameroon as well. That was the thing. They had 2 men, Benjamin Masson and someone else was sent off. And so they hadn't started very well. Maradona hadn't played particularly well at all. He was going through his troubles that he was having with Naples, with Napoli. And they played Brazil in the second round, and Maradona showed, it was a dreadful game against Brazil. I remember it quite well, but I remember watching it at the time feeling quite underwhelmed by what I was watching, because I was expecting so much from both these teams. Maradona showed one piece of class, which I think led to the goal, the only goal of the game, which knocked them out. But we're talking 5 seconds in 4 games. So despite the fact that they were holders, and you had Maradona who could do what everyone knew he could do, they hadn't played very well at all. And I guess you could say that there was a case to say that maybe Yugoslavia were favourites. I mean, they lost their first game 4-1 against Germany. So you could say the first game against the big team, they lost. So yeah, I think it was marginal. They might have been considered favourites, especially as they beat Spain in the last 16 as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was because I wasn't even a teenager yet when Italia 90 happened. So
oh, stop it! I was.
But correct me if I'm wrong, did it end 0-0 and it went to penalties, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, it did. It went to penalties, and Maradona missed. Yeah. And Yugoslavia, I can't remember who it was, but Yugoslavia had a penalty to take them through, and they missed that one. Argentina scored the next one, and Yugoslavia missed the next one, and they were out. One thing's worth watching for both this penalty shootout and also the penalty shootout in the 91 European Cup final is how far off the line the goalkeepers come. It's really, really interesting. They end up like 2-3 yards off their line, and if you think how much they're made to stay on their line now, and how much of a show of it is made by referees, like you stay there, they really do sort of come off their line. And it was a shame, because the game against Spain, they played so well, and Stojkovic had scored 2 incredible goals. The first one was a free kick, and the second one was a cross, which you would expect sort of a first-time volley or something. And the Spanish defender expected a first-time volley, because he slid straight past Stojkovic, only for Stojkovic to sort of trap it dead and do a little drag back and score from there. It was an incredible goal. It's a real shame that they didn't get through to that penalty shootout, because I know Italy had the momentum behind them with the fans and everything, but I think that was an Italian team that could be got at, as Argentina proved in the semi-final. I think we could have seen Yugoslavia in the final quite easily if they'd beaten Argentina.
Yeah, it would have been a repeat of the first round match between West Germany and Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting if that was the case, if Yugoslavia had learned their lessons from the first game. I mean, in fact, why did that happen? Because it just seems, for a team so talented, it just seemed an anomaly. I know Lothar Matthäus played very well.
Yeah.
Even taking into account, it just seemed an anomaly that a team like Yugoslavia, you would lose to Germany that widely for one and be dominated.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is. I mean, I guess for Bremer, Matthäus, and Klinsmann, it was their home stadium, that first game, because it was played at the San Siro. Maybe there was something about the familiarity of them knowing the pitch. Maybe it was because I don't think Yugoslavia made Euro '88, but maybe it was Yugoslavia not quite knowing what to do in tournament football, and maybe playing the game rather than the opposition, if you see what I mean. They were playing their own natural style rather than adapting to what the Germans could do, which is admirable to a point. But then when you're playing a team as good as what West Germany were, I think maybe you have to sort of adapt to some extent. And Germany certainly exposed that. I mean, particularly that Mateus goal where he ran pretty much the length of the pitch, didn't he, to score that goal. But yeah, it's I've got a feeling that they probably would have learnt their lesson, and the game in the final would have been a whole lot closer.
So that happened. How was that World Cup run viewed in Yugoslavia? Was it viewed with success or disappointment because of the caliber of the players?
I think it was viewed as a moderate success. People knew how good this Yugoslav team was. That the 87 team at the World Cup in Chile, at the under-20 team, they made people sort of sit up and listen. I think, to be fair as well, there were distractions back home at the time. We're only talking a few weeks after the Maksimir riot between the Dinamo fans and the Red Star fans. So I'm not sure whether it was received, the football thing was received in a good way, or whether people were just relieved that there was no sort of outward ethnic tension being shown in such a public manner to the world, because it would be easy for fans to turn up with Croatia flags and support Yugoslavia or something, something like that. It would have been easy for that to happen and for some sort of tension to spill out over at the World Cup, and it didn't. I think there was some relief at that.
You mentioned there about a riot.
Yeah.
Was that the one with Boban was involved in with the kick? Is that the one? Can you just explain the background behind that and why that kick is seen as very symbolic?
Yeah, so that was the Maksimir riot in May 1990. That was a game between Red Star Belgrade and Dinamo Zagreb, the two biggest teams at the time. Red Star turned up with their ultras group, the Delie, and the Dinamo ones were the ultra group with the Bad Blue Boys who were there protecting their turf, I guess. It's difficult to see how it started, which side was responsible. From the footage I've watched, I think it was probably the Red Star fans who were close to some Dinamo fans and started sort of tearing the place up. And the violence spilled from there. The Bad Blue Ultras at the other end could see what was happening and wanted to get on the pitch to protect their players and their fans down the other end, defend their fans. So that their players appeared on the pitch. Initially, the players were a little bit sort of confused by what was happening, and the police started retaliating against fans, which is when you see Boban do his kick against the policeman. Ironically, the policeman was a Bosnian Serb. He wasn't he was a Bosnian Muslim. Sorry, he wasn't a Serb or a Croatian Serb or anything like that. The riot sort of spiraled off from there. So Boban kicked the policeman. The policeman walloped him back. The players got off the pitch pretty quick, and the riot sort of played out as you kind of expect it to be, sort of cat and mouse between the fans and the police. The sort of water cannons arrived and that sort of thing. There's evidence of premeditation. So the Delie were led by a hooligan by the name of Arkan, who's a very horrible but interesting character. He was he'd served time in many different countries in Western Europe for armed robberies and stuff, but seemed to get some sort of Yugoslav protection from higher up in the state. And there was evidence that they had turned up with sort of rocks and stones and things like that. And I think this was not long after the first parliamentary elections in Croatia, where the Croatian nationalists and Franjo Tuđman had pretty much wiped the floor with everybody else. So it was set against that sort of tension. Interestingly, the players, when they went inside the tunnel, they didn't sort of carry on this sort of ethnic hatred between themselves. They knew each other from playing for Yugoslavia, and they knew each other from the World Cup in '87. So they sort of mingled with each other to make sure they were okay and check they were okay. Following the riot, Boban was banned for a period of time, which is why he couldn't appear at the World Cup. That definitely would have helped them if he'd been there. Boban did meet the policeman not long afterwards. He met a few days later. The policeman's colleagues were saying that a coffee and a chat, and that was it. And the policeman ended up going back and being a driving instructor back in Bosnia. But there's a memorial outside the Maksimir Stadium saying this is where the Croatian War of Independence started. It didn't start there. The seeds of the Croatian War of Independence happened long before. Dinamo Zagreb played in the Yugoslav League the following season. Boban even represented Yugoslavia afterwards. You're a deluded nationalist if you think the war started at Maksimir that afternoon. No one really seriously believes that it does. But I don't think its visual significance can be underestimated. Maybe the actual impact of it can, seem as people carried on playing for Yugoslavia and the clubs remain in the league for a bit longer. But visually, it was quite a significant event, understandably.
So after Italia 90, obviously it's different to today because back then you had a free foreigner rule. Two things happened. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did a lot of the Yugoslavian players actually get signed up by some of the best in Europe? And also a few months after the World Cup Italia 90 ended, you had a qualifying campaign for the Euros in 1992.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, which players got signed up by which clubs, Yugoslavian clubs? And second of all, who's in Yugoslavia's group for that 92 campaign? I know Denmark was.
Yeah.
I know they came runners up, and that's something we'll get into. But from what I remember, they used to seem to have dominated that group pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I don't know who else was in it with them, unfortunately, but I think they did. I think they qualified pretty comfortably. I don't think it was for this qualifying period, but around this time, Yugoslavia played Holland or the Netherlands at the Maksimir Stadium, and the Croatian fans turned up and booed the Yugoslav anthem and cheered the Dutch anthem and cheered the Dutch the whole way through the game. I'm not sure if that was for the Euro 92 qualifying or not. I can't remember who they had elsewhere in their group. But you did start to see players leave around this time. So you had Dragan Stojkovic go to Marseille. You had Davisuka go to Real Madrid, I think it was first. He went to Seville. No, he went to Seville, I think. It was Sevilla before that, I think. And yeah, you had players like Boban and Savicevic make their way across to Milan as well. And just bit by bit, it was a greater sort of hemorrhaging that happened. And you can understand why players did. First of all, you want to get out of that war zone. And secondly, what you want is you've got an opportunity to earn an awful lot of money for your family that you've not had that opportunity to do before. So it's understandable why. We eventually saw players come to England a little later after that. Asanovic went to Derby, Igor Stimac went to Derby. And eventually, I think we had players like Mokonic go to Coventry, who was first Bosnian in the Premier League, who actually fought within for the Bosnian army as well. But I think there was a wanting of players to get out of there for their own personal safety, their family's safety, and to earn the money that they felt they probably were. They were justified in earning. They knew how good they were individually, and they knew they could mix it in Serie A and La Liga. So they had the opportunity to go do that themselves.
But then 1 year after the World Cup Italia 90, was 1 year? Yeah, Red Star Belgrade. No, was it 92?
91, Red Star won.
91, yeah, it was 91. Red Star Belgrade, they do very well in the European Cup, still as it was known then.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a story actually where in the second round of that campaign they were drawn against Rangers, and Graham Souness had because Walt Smith was assistant at the time. Graham Souness asked Walt Smith to do a scouting mission and Red Star Belgrade, and Walt Smith came back with his report and he had two words on it. The first one was O, and the second one began with S. and that's how feared they were in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just how good were they? Because they beat Bayern Munich as well onto the way to the final as
Yeah,
well.
they did beat. Yeah, they did beat Bayern Munich. They were an incredibly good team that knew each other very, very well. Again, because they'd been together for so long. You don't have the transference between clubs that you have in Western Europe. So this team knew each other well. They were confident in each other, and I guess they were a little bit. I think maybe underestimated is the wrong word. I don't know. Walter Smith went out to scout, and I'm sure Bayern Munich sent out scouts to watch Bayern Munich play. The Bayern Munich team was going through a bit of a sort of bit of an nadir at the time. It was sort of a bit of a bad 6 weeks run of form, and I think nowadays, should that happen again, which I don't think it wouldn't be it wouldn't be as much of a surprise at all that Red Star done that. So if you think about it, it was a much more democratic time for clubs at that time. It was only 5 years after Steaua Bucharest won the European Cup as well, a Romanian side, and it wasn't. Was it this was the first year? Because the year they had group stages was the final year of the European Cup before it changed to the Champions League. So there might have been group stages here. Definitely the year after. But it was a much more democratic way of playing because you draw two names out of a hat and you could have Red Star Belgrade versus Manchester United. And all of a sudden you got one of those two big favourites has gone. And if you're an Eastern European team with a lucky draw, you can get quite far. You're never going to see a Red Star Belgrade or a Steaua Bucharest again, unfortunately. And I don't think Marseille underestimated them. Marseille were very confident in their own abilities. They got Dragan Stojkovic, who knew all about the Red Star team. He'd left them the season before. And they got Papin, and I think they still got Chris Waddle. And I think they got Abida Pele as well. So they got a very good team themselves. But I guess maybe it was the pre-internet unknown. So you didn't know this team and their intricacies as well. But at the same time, I don't think they sort of appeared out of nowhere to win that European Cup.
Yeah. So obviously they won it, and then I do remember, funny enough, and we'll talk about the quality of the leagues going downhill later. But I remember after that, the first game I remember seeing highlights, not the whole match, just highlights of, was when they played Man United in the European Super Cup. And from the few highlights I saw, I was pretty young then, so my memory might not be great, but it seemed as though Man United had a fairly comfortable time. And bear in mind, I think it was 2 legs, Super Cup at that time. Seemed to have a fairly comfortable time with them. Was that the first signs of Red Star starting to disintegrate, and actually that team starting to break apart? And
yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember that particular fixture, the Red Star thing. The Manchester United game, but they did win the Intercontinental Championship later on that year. And as much as we sort of mocked the Club World Cup for being a bit of a sort of jolly abroad, certainly in this country we do. I don't know about, maybe they take it a bit more seriously than the rest of Europe, but I remember the Liverpool teams of the 80s would sort of go out to Japan and spend about sort of a week on the beer before playing the games they needed to. I think they certainly play it a lot more seriously in South America. So whoever they beat in the South America, Colo Colo, I think rings a bell from Chile. Whoever they beat there would have taken that game very seriously. And so while not to the same standard as Manchester United, they did become intercontinental champions that year, beating a team that would have been motivated from South America.
Yeah. But then the quality of not just that team, but the whole team goes down, understandably, because there's a war on, and a lot of the players have left as well. Yeah. When did the league get suspended? Because surely, the leagues in different countries get suspended, because surely you must have, because of what was going on.
No, they tended to carry on. So at the end of the either 91 or 92 season, Slovenia and Croatia broke away to form their own league. And while the war was going on, there was still in European competition. Hajduk Split played Spurs
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I'm a Spurs fan, so I
Oh, are you?
remember.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Igor Stimac says that on the way back from the Spurs game, being the coach, they had to go through several sort of roadblocks and stuff like that. So they were still competing in Europe. Dinamo Zagreb had a name change inflicted upon them to Croatia Zagreb, and they still played in leagues. And you would have you'd have the Yugoslav leagues carrying on. I think there was still a league of sorts in Bosnia, certainly in Republika Srpska, which is a Serb autonomous region within Bosnia. They had a league. Quite a lot was made of that as well. There was a newspaper, I think Derby, it was called Derbi, I think it was called. They certainly made a lot of Serb nationalism and self-determination through reporting on the Republika Srpska league. Teams like Banja Luka would be reported on, and there would be games arranged between teams from the Republika Srpska and Serbia proper for propaganda purposes. So yeah, the leagues did carry on, games did carry on. Like I say, World War II, the Axis powers started a league in Yugoslavia as well. FIFA gave Croatia FIFA membership in the 1940s. They played games against Switzerland, and they played other fixtures as well. So yeah, football carries on even during wars.
Yeah, indeed. But although it's carrying on, as I say, the quality is going down.
Yeah.
What was their record, Yugoslavian clubs? What was their record like in Europe after Red Star Belgrade's winning 91?
Yeah, it went down a bit. So I think Olimpia Ljubljana might have been the first former Yugoslav club to play in the Champions League. And they didn't even get as far as the league. They got done 7-0 by Milan on aggregate in one of the qualifying rounds. So they didn't do so great at all. Dinamo made it in the sort of mid to late 90s. They were in the group stages under their name Croatia Zagreb. They didn't do great, but this was at the time when Dinamo were being used for propaganda purposes by Franjo Tudjman, the Croatian president. He inflicted this name change on them as like a sort of top-down name change in a bid to unite Croatia. The Dinamo fans weren't having any of it. This is Dinamo. This is our thing. We fought in this war for Croatian independence, and we are as patriotic Croatians as you can imagine. But don't touch our thing. Dinamo is ours. Don't go changing its name. And Red Star and Partizan, they've barely sort of scratched the surface of European competition. I think maybe Partizan, Red Star's best result was beating Liverpool a few years ago, 2-0 in America now. But they haven't really done very good at all. All the teams have really struggled to get out of the group stages. I think Dinamo did it in the mid to like maybe 97, 98 season. They got out and got to the quarterfinals, I think, but that's it. And it's inevitable, as we were saying earlier on, about you sort of start hemorrhaging players, and your best players go elsewhere. They go to the big leagues, and this was still a time when you could still grab yourself a bargain if you were a bigger club as well. So you've immediately or suddenly got this talent pool available to you, and so you want to go exploring it for all the other guys get there as well. And so it was inevitable that it was going to happen, and probably not a bad thing either for the individual players, but it was for the clubs. There's been talk about doing a United Balkan League, a United Yugoslav League. They do that in basketball, and I think they do it in something else as well. Ice hockey or something rings a bell. But yeah, a United Yugoslav League. But I don't see how the big teams, the big four teams, would go for that. Partizan, Dinamo Hajduk, and Red Star, because they're pretty much guaranteed European places every year. I don't know why you'd want to dilute that down and all of a sudden sort of fight that out with the other three either. So I think the appetite has gone for a United League, certainly from the big influential clubs. But I don't think you can blame the players for sort of leaving as quick as they did when they did.
Of all the former Yugoslavian republics, Croatia seems to have done their national side, seems to have done a lot better than planned. Why is that compared to, say, Slovenia or Serbia or Montenegro, etc.?
Yeah, I think Serbia. Slovenia. I've asked Slovenes this, and they say that their national sport is alpine skiing, and so football isn't the biggest thing there. Recently, it's cycling, as you see, Tadej Pogačar and Primož Roglic winning Grand Tours in cycling. So football never has been the priority there. I think if you speak to Croatians, they're obviously a very, very proud nation, very proud of being a new nation, and that gives them an extra bit of motivation, I guess. The message on the side of the bus, it was either for this World Cup or the World Cup 2018. On the side of the Croatian bus, it was small country, big idea, or big dreams, small country, big dreams. It was on the side of the bus. So there's this sort of collectiveness about the Croatian psyche, about sort of we're a new country. This is for us. We can do this. We've only been here a short amount of time. Look what we can achieve. And that's quite a recent thing, though, the success. There was a large period of time, Croatia, they qualified for Euro 2004. They didn't do great. England beat them 4-2 with Wayne Rooney scoring a couple of goals. They didn't do great between there and the World Cup in 2018. World Cup 1998, they obviously got to the semi-finals as their first venture into a World Cup. And again, I think that was a combination of the fact that they were a new country and they were excited to show what Croatia was and what Croatia can do. Plus, they got a lot of these really, really good players still from the Yugoslav days and the 1987 World Cup days. Boban was still there, and you'd still got Stimac and Slaven Bilic and players like that. Davor Suker was still there, so you'd still got the nucleus of an incredibly good team. They were lucky is the wrong word, but they were quite fortunate to have such a great nucleus of players for a very small independent team. Serbia, I'm not sure why they haven't really sort of progressed. I'm guessing it's a little bit different. The Serb psyche, as I said earlier on, it was like glorious failures and glorious defeats is their thing. That's what we're the oppressed. The NATO hates us and Western Europe hates us. We had this glorious battle, the Battle of Kosovo, and our main guy, he sacrificed himself for this greater cause. The Milos Obilic, he killed the Turkish commander and then was killed himself. He sacrificed himself. And I think there's a lot of that in Serb football, the glorious failure, whereas Croatia are all for the sort of, this is great, this is new, let's show everyone what we can do. Montenegro and Macedonia are strange because they've never really troubled. North Macedonia got to the last Euros, but they've never really. Well, Euros the World Cup, I can't remember, but they've never really troubled tournaments. But they've been quite annoying to play against, particularly if you're an England fan. I mean, I remember Macedonia scoring from a corner against England about 20 odd years ago. Yeah. So they're one of those annoying places you have to go and play that you never really relish, but they never sort of tend to qualify. But I think that's the difference between Croatia and Serbia, definitely.
Say about Macedonia not qualifying, but they seem to be getting ever closer. So, I mean, this recent Euro campaign, okay, they only got 8 points, but the games they're in would seem to be pretty tight. And then at the qualifying for the last World Cup, they beat Italy in the playoffs as well. Why is it called North Macedonia now? Because unless I'm mistaken, I can't see a South Macedonia either.
Yeah, so when Macedonia got its independence, it was known as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. There is a region of Greece also called Macedonia, and this was a bone of contention between them both for quite some time. So I think they settled on about 20 years or so, but they settled on North Macedonia. So I think whatever South Macedonia is, it's within northern Greece.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
you mentioned him before. Can you just talk a little bit about Arkan? Because, and this is going to sound really funny, a few years ago, there used to be, my friend actually gave me some series of it. There's a documentary series called Football Factories International, and it's presented by none other than Danny Dyer.
Yeah.
Which sounds bizarre, but it was actually a very good series. And he would go to these different countries and look at the hooligan aspect of the countries. And he went to Croatia and Serbia, two of the countries he went to. And with the Croatian, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talk about Arkan. Didn't you use some of the football hooligans as basically soldiers in the war and try to prop up the numbers?
Yeah, so Arkan himself was born, his dad was a Yugoslav Air Force pilot, and he wanted a similar sort of career for Arkan. He wanted none of that. He was, he was into a sort of more exciting life of crime and stuff. So I think he's either wanted or has been imprisoned in about 8 Western European countries, managed to escape from a few of them. And he definitely had some sort of state level protection to some extent. Excuse me, he was arrested by the police at one point in Belgrade, but some sort of got his way out of that, even though he managed to wound some of the policemen involved that arrested him. So he definitely enjoys some sort of protection. I'm not sure how much of a football fan he was, to be honest. I think he saw the Delia as something to exploit. I think he could see the way Yugoslavia was going, and he could see these as a group of people to exploit, because Partizan Belgrade were the sort of the team sort of based around Yugoslavia and the army and that sort of thing. Red Star Belgrade were definitely a Serb team. And I think he saw that and he managed to exploit that. So when the wars came along, yeah, he recruited some of the Delia as his paramilitary group, the Tigers. And he said himself he got them to do things like cut their hair and stop drinking and sort of, turn up on time and sort of look a bit more militaristic. And he trained them to do terrible, terrible things in Croatia and in Bosnia as well. There's an American photographer called Ron Haviv, if you want to Google him, Haviv, who was embedded within, managed to get himself embedded with Arkan and his Tigers, and took some photos at great risk to himself of Arkan soldiers committing atrocities. And he was seen and he managed to smuggle out these photos, but Arkan wasn't very happy at all. Arkan was seen at the location of many, many massacres. Although weirdly enough, he had a strange kind of relationship with Sinisa Mihailovic. So Sinisa Mihailovic's parents were of mixed race. One was Croatian, one was Serb. And when he was playing for Red Star, Arkan and his paramilitaries turned up in Vukovar, which is very close to where Mihailovic is from. He's from a little place called Borovo Selo next door. And he managed to smuggle Mihailovic's parents across and out of the war zone. I think it's probably over to Belgrade he managed to get them. And Mihailovic's uncle was an officer in the Croatian army. And he was captured. As soon as it realized who he was, Arkan rang up Mihailovic and said, "I've got your uncle here. What do you want me to do with him?" And he smuggled the sort of Croatian uncle out of the war zone and made sure he wasn't mistreated, which particularly because there was a massacre not long after of wounded Croatian soldiers who were found at a hospital in Vukovar and were taken to this farm out in the countryside and shot. So Mihailovic may well owe Arkan a huge debt for saving the life of his parents and his uncle, but he himself, he wasn't a particularly nice person at all. After the war, he bought a football club. He could have bought Red Star possibly, but he ended up going for Obilic, which is the name named after the guy that I was telling you about a second ago, the Battle of Kosovo that killed the Turkish commander and then was gloriously killed himself. He was known to intimidate his players, the opposition players, opposition referees, and he himself was assassinated in a hotel in Belgrade in 2000. I think they caught the person that did it, but there's questions about where the order to kill him came from. Did it come from high up in the Yugoslav government? He was an indicted war criminal at that time as well. So it wasn't like he was sort of a rogue football hooligan. He was a very disciplined, very dangerous and very, very horrible person.
Yeah, it's I've just all read about Arkan. Is like I say how horrible he was as a person.
Yeah, after he died, after he was shot, the Lazio ultras paid homage to him. Mihailovic was playing for Lazio at the time, and they did a bit of tifo the week after he was shot in the crowd. It was to Arkan the Tiger or something like that. But yeah, Lazio ultras have not known, they're known for their sort of provocative banners, and this was one of them.
Just quickly, because we're almost at the end, last five
Yeah.
minutes. Obviously, we talked about players' transfers, people from Yugoslavia going to like some of the biggest clubs in Europe. Did any of them ended up having to fight in the war before leaving? The main
Mo
inter-
Konic did. Yeah, Mo Konic did. He fought for the Bosnian army, and he was wounded. Actually, he had a trial in Bosnia for a team. I think he crashed a car on. He'd done some time in the Bosnian army, and he crashed a car either on the way to this trial or as part of his fighting or something like that. And he had his trial a couple of days later, and he played with two broken arms. Which is just incredible, especially for a defender when you spend half your time slide tackling and stuff. He fought in the war. He went to Coventry City. There's a rather mischievous quote which I did put in the book and I took out because I thought it was a bit mean. Simon Cooper wrote about Zvonimir Boban a long time ago. They've done some work together since, and they're good friends since. So I don't know whether they discussed this quote or not, but it was talking about Boban, talking about himself. Boban talks about himself as being this great nationalist, and he is. He's very well read on Croatian nationalism. I think he's got a degree in Croatian philosophy or history or something like that. And he talked about, here I was ready to die for this Croatian cause when he kicked the policeman at the Maximir riot. And there was an article that Simon Cooper wrote, and I think the last sentence was that, well, when he could have, while many of his comrades were dying for the Croatian cause, he was playing football in Italy, which is probably a little bit mean. I think I think the Croatian players, I think they were encouraged to play. It was felt that they could do more for raising the profile of Croatia and the Croatian nationalist cause playing abroad than they could fighting in the trenches. And Goran Ivanisevic, tennis player, is a good example of that. He got to the final of the Wimbledon Championships in 1992. And he said, he's renowned for this really fast serve. And he said, the reason I'm such a fast serve is every time I throw the ball up in the air and serve is because I imagine the ball is a Serb. And he... And then in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, Croatia took a team out of various different athletes, and he was the flag bearer. So this was a huge, proud moment for Croatia. You know, he comes out in front of 100,000 people and 6 billion people watching on telly, holding this great big Croatian flag, and you can see them all beaming with pride while this war is going on in their country. The symbolism of it is huge, and it was felt that they could do more that way than they could sort of fighting in the trenches along with thousands of other people. It wouldn't make much difference there if they were fighting.
Cool. Right. Finally, because we talked about the decreasing quality in the leagues, but what is there any green shoots, both in terms of not just the leagues in the former Yugoslavian republics, but also the actual quality of players as well? Because we talked about Croatia, they seem to be getting more and more players, just all these players. But what about the other former Yugoslavian states? Are they some green shoots from there? Green shoots?
I don't think so. I give the example in the book of Zoran Tosic, who left Serbia very early and joined Manchester United. And he didn't play an awful lot for Manchester United. I think he joined them when he was like 20, 21. He was one of those Manchester United players that's there, doesn't play a lot, gets sent out on loan, and then they sell him. You know, that Manchester United have, as much as they've had the sort of Ryan Giggs and Paul Scholes come through, there's only 11 places on a pitch, and they've had many other players who unfortunately haven't been able to break through. So Zoran Tosic was one. He was sold to one of the teams in Moscow, and he stayed there for an awful long time, and he's been very successful, and he's won quite a lot, and he's played 80 odd times for the Serb national team as well. He's had a tremendous career, but if he had played 20 years ago, he wouldn't have been allowed to do any of that until he was 28 years old, and I think that's the big problem. Football scouting networks now are so impressive, and sort of they cast their net so far and so wide, the big teams do, that I don't think players stay in Yugoslavia and Croatia long enough to be able to establish a team, really. as soon as one of them becomes good, they get swept up by a Western European team. And because of that, you don't really have the opportunity for a nucleus of players to gather together. And I think we're kind of stuck in that cycle forevermore. I can't see it changing. I hope I'm wrong, but I can't see it changing why there's no Balkan League, and I can't see an appetite for a Balkan League. And given the fact that Croatia is in the European Union and freedom of movement, same for Slovenia, I can't see it changing at all for any of the former republics, sadly.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I would say highly recommend this book. Brilliant first book from yourself. It was a brilliant book in general. Chris Etchingham, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate you having me on. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.